Hi everyone, welcome back to Jojo Fry Rocks. This week I've been thinking about something that came up in the last video that I posted, which was all about the guitar that my dad recently dropped off here for me to look after. I did a little bit of singing just to test out the volume of the guitar acoustically and that kind of thing, to see what it would be like if I were to do some kind of open mic performance or something like that. And I had a few comments from long-time viewers of the channel saying something along the lines of, "Did we know that you could sing?" And I thought that was really funny, because I just feel like I've posted quite a lot of content that involves me singing. I've posted cover videos, so covers of songs, whether that's been acoustic or otherwise. I've posted, I've got a whole playlist of those. I've posted jam sessions that I did with Dan quite a while ago when we were doing a kind of duo thing, sort of jam sessions, and like one whole set almost, in which I asked viewers if they wanted to help us to pick our set list for an open mic night, which didn't end up happening, but nonetheless I did post that. I think I've posted a few different shorts and things, and you know, this is kind of going back to 2024, so a couple of years. In fact, that was kind of how my channel started. I literally just started posting videos of me playing the guitar, the acoustic guitar, and singing. And yeah, I put that into a playlist, which you can find on here. So, you know, I think I've done also bits and pieces of when I've been doing demos and reviews of different bits of gear. I've sung and recorded myself using the Sonido Live Dock and things like that. I try to put that kind of stuff into gear demos and reviews because I think it makes it a little bit more interesting and entertaining. So I feel like I've put quite a lot of that stuff on here. So it's just really interesting to hear from, like I say, not new viewers, like long-time viewers of the channel who seem to be unaware of it. So that's just a really eye-opening revelation for me, I guess. So I wanted to make a video today about my singing journey, I guess. You know, we all know, I think, quite a lot about my guitar journey because I talk about it all the time, obviously, and this feels like kind of more of a guitar channel, I suppose, than anything else. But I deliberately didn't name the channel anything about guitar. I named it Jojo Fry Rocks. It's primarily around the fact that I like rock music, I like listening to rock music, I like playing rock music, and I like singing, and especially singing rock music. So I thought I would talk a little bit about where that sort of love of singing came from and how I've sort of learnt to do it as well. Because I had a few comments from people just saying, "Oh, you know, oh, you've got really nice singing voice. I wish I could sing." And I mean, it's lovely, and thank you very much for the compliment. I always appreciate that. I will always take a compliment. But I feel like singing's one of those things. It really is something that anyone can do. If you're not tone deaf, you can learn to sing. And actual true tone deafness is rare. It's really quite rare. So it is a skill. Singing is a skill like anything else. You can learn to do it. Some people may have a bit more of a natural capacity for it. A lot of it is about your particular anatomy, the physical setup that you have of your lungs, your vocal cords, and all of those things. And that will influence the tone and timbre of your voice, and it will influence the range of notes that you can comfortably produce. Sure. So there is a bit of physiology to it, there's a bit of biology to it, anatomy, setup, and those things. But you can also, with training, try to overcome some of those limitations even. And I have learnt to do a little bit of that as well. So I'm just going to share with you today, I guess, how I've got to where I am and some of the stuff that I know about it. And I am by no means an expert in any sense, but I will also guide you towards some really good YouTube channels, really good sources of information if you're into vocal tuition, vocal coaching, and that kind of thing, and if you want to learn or if you want to know more about it. So that's the video today. Where and when and how did I start singing? Why do I love singing? Why has that been such an important thing to me throughout my life? Because it really, really has been. And it really, really started very early on for me with my dad. Again, so obviously my dad has been a huge influence in my life and a huge musical influence to me from being very, very, very little. I would say 4 or 5 years old, basically from the start of my memories that I can remember in my life. My dad was born in 1955, so he grew up, I think, in a generation that was hugely influenced by music. I think in growing up sort of in the late 50s and throughout the 1960s, that was probably the heyday of the cultural impact, cultural significance of popular music. I think growing up at that time where you had Elvis Presley, arguably the biggest, most famous, most iconic singer and rock star that the world has ever known, throughout his heyday, was one of the biggest cultural influences in the Western world at that time. I think you were growing up at a time, again, through the 50s and 60s, where television is a new medium, so that hasn't quite peaked at that time. Radio was really the sort of dominant force in media. So again, music is right there at the top of the tree. Everyone has a radio, everyone listens to music, music is everywhere. The record industry, record sales, it's all kind of reaching that kind of peak of cultural dominance at this time. You also had a factor of growing up in the northwest of the UK, for my dad and his family. That was huge because that is where the Beatles came from. Again, arguably the biggest band there has ever been in terms of fame, importance to mainstream music, cultural reach, influence. They came from Liverpool, and that is pretty much where my dad and my family lived and grew up at that time. And I think that was it must have been just such a mind-blowing phenomenon, seeing basically a group of guys who came from the same, more or less, pretty much exact same background as you, and reaching the height of global popularity that there has ever been. I think you can't help but be influenced deeply by that. And for my dad's family, I feel like music was a huge thing for them. Listening to it, going to watch bands and any form of kind of musical entertainment, because that's the kind of entertainment that you had through the 1960s and 70s as well. And that became something that you also did recreationally. Everyone sang along to songs when they came on the radio. My dad's mother, so my grandmother, who I've never actually met, and we won't go into all the reasons, but I do know that she was a performer. She, you know, in one of the roles that she had in her life at some point when she was young was as a tiller girl. So that was a dancer, basically, who would perform in sort of variety shows and do like a kick routine. So there'd be like a long line of them sort of doing this can type routine. It was a big thing. It was a thing. So she was an actual performer who got up on stage and did that kind of thing. And my dad and his brothers and sisters were really, you know, quite used to, from a young age, entertaining and performing in front of people. My dad was in kind of a group at school. At his school, the school was called Fairfield, and he was in this group called the Fairfield Six. So obviously it was him and a bunch of his friends who would put on performances at school and beyond. You know, I think they would perform and do talent competitions and things like that. And this was something that also, you know, whenever they had family gatherings, my dad and his brothers in particular would get together, play guitar and sing. And it's obviously something that they did growing up, when their parents would have people come round and literally entertain people at their house. You know, the children would put on this kind of show for people. And it was just a really, really big thing in their family. And that even went on into like our childhoods, me and my sister. So we didn't grow up in the Northwest. My parents kind of moved away from that area and down to Dorset in the Southwest. But we used to quite frequently go back and visit. We'd visit our wider family around the area in Cheshire, and we would have these get-togethers of my dad's family, my uncles, and they would still do that kind of thing. So they would get together and start singing. And I do actually have some footage of that from, I think it was about 1988. It might have been a little bit later. I can't remember the exact year, but I distinctly remember this. And I had some footage from an old video camera, transferred, digitized. So I'm going to share a little bit of that with you, because this is the sort of thing that I grew up with and that I just saw as being a fairly normal part of family life, I guess. And I also remember thinking that it was brilliant and thinking, yes, this is something that I want to do. I want to be able to stand up there and sing a song.
You give me hope and consolation. Oh, constipation.
You give me strength to carry on, and you're always there to lend a hand in everything.
This is how he is on a Friday night, Big James.
That's the wonder,
Like a karaoke, like.
the wonder of you. The wonder
Am I going to be the three black ones?
Yeah. And when you smile, the world is brighter. You touch my hand and I'm a king. Your kiss to me is worth a fortune. Your love for me is everything. I guess I'll never know the reason why you love me as you do. That's the wonder of you. Well, Saturday night at 8 o'clock, I know where I'm gonna go.
Oh, guess what we missed?
I'm gonna pick my baby up
Oh, never mind.
and take her to the picture show. Everybody in the neighborhood is dressing up to be there too. Well, we're gonna have a ball just like we always do. Saturday night at the movies. Who cares what picture you see? When you're hugging with your baby, that's the world about me. But don't forget who's taking you home and in whose arms you're gonna be. So darling, save the last dance for me. Oh, I know that the music's fine, like sparkling wine. Always have your fun. Oh, I know. Yes, I know. Laugh and sing while we're apart. Don't give your heart to anyone. But don't forget who's taking you home and whose arms you're gonna be. So darling, save the last dance for me.
And so then when we were growing up, in our house, my dad was quite often singing, playing the guitar, and that was where my love of guitar came from. I wanted to be able to do that. I wanted him to teach me. I wanted him to show me how to do it. Obviously, when you're a child, you don't realise that, okay, the guy can only play 4 chords. But actually, that's the genius thing, because it didn't matter. And all the songs that he liked, most of them, and wanted to just kind of strum and sing along to, like a lot of them, like I said in the previous video from last week, were Elvis songs, which are actually really very easy, really quite straightforward to play. And that obviously was just a vehicle for Elvis's vocal talents. It wasn't really ever about the music. So that was part of what created him as a rock star. And therefore it was perfect for people to be able to start playing. You know, you learn a few basic chords, you get a guitar, and boom, you're practically Elvis in your own mind and in your own living room. And your kids think you're a rock star. Perfect. So that's kind of where things started for me in terms of playing, but I could already carry a tune at that point. By the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I had already been singing along to vinyl records when we put them on and played them in the house. Every car trip, every car journey that we ever went on, you know, in the 80s, obviously you had a tape deck, cassette deck in the car. Well, you had the radio as well, but we had loads and loads of cassettes and tapes, and we'd put those on in the car and just sing along. Any car journey, whether it was to the supermarket or whether it was a 6-hour trek up to Cheshire, we'd put that music on and be singing along to it. no matter what it was. And the school that I went to, the secondary school that I went to, wasn't the sort of place that would have a choir or anything like that. You know, it just wasn't that kind of school. It was a little bit rough, really. So yeah, we didn't have a lot of access to kind of extracurricular activities in that sense. And my music lessons, my actual music lessons at secondary school were atrocious. Just atrocious. The guy who was the music teacher at the time, I think must have been in the middle of some kind of, you know, he was in his 50s. I think he was having some sort of breakdown. He seemed really unstable. We definitely didn't do a lot of music. He was obsessed with this one kid in my class who was a pain. Like, this kid was a total pain, and I get it, but this guy absolutely hated him, and he would just have like a screaming meltdown that every time this kid kicked off, and that was basically what happened every week in our music lessons. We just didn't get to do anything. We just like watched this guy's breakdown in real time. And then, so I didn't get anything really out of music lessons at school, even though I really, really loved music. So that made me a little bit sad. And then I kind of had to find my own ways to fulfill that and find a way to, you know, practice my singing and everything. And I guess that was when, you know, around the age of kind of 12, 13, we're getting into the early 90s here. And one of the sort of big trends that started happening in the 90s was this thing that came over from Japan, which was karaoke. And I know it feels like that has been with us forever, but at the time, that was like a big new thing. You know, for the kind of first time, you could, you know, go out and there would be evenings of karaoke where you could sing along to the actual backing track of songs, you know, really popular mainstream songs. They just took the vocal track off and gave you the microphone, which was a pretty awesome thing from my perspective. So we would do things like, you know, we'd go to social clubs, because that used to be a thing, where families could go. And obviously we went on holidays as well, and we tended to go to like holiday camps, but also holidays abroad, but where there would be entertainment as part of that package. So you started to go on holiday, and part of the evening entertainment, particularly as I was getting older and into my teens, would be this karaoke session. There would be at least one of these during the week, or a couple of them, you know, over the 2 weeks or whatever you were there for. And it just became kind of a cultural norm, I guess, that throughout that kind of exploded throughout the 90s. And so I loved it. Of course, I could, you know, you put your name down, you say, yes, I want to, you know, I'll look through the book. Oh, here's a song I want to sing. Yeah, I'll put my name down for that. And then you wait your turn, and then you go up and do your song. And those were some of my earliest experiences of performing in front of an audience at holiday camps, you know, social clubs, that kind of thing. And I absolutely loved it. I loved it. I did not feel nervous, never once got any kind of stage fright. I never have. I've just never had that. I think, there's, to some extent, when you're singing and playing, that does come into it, because you're having to kind of juggle those things and it's not always very easy. But with singing, never. If I was just getting up there and singing a song, always cool as a cucumber. Like, literally no nerves whatsoever. I couldn't wait. I was just sat there patiently counting down. Okay, I've got 3 more people before me, 2 more people before me. Just, trying to contain my excitement until I could get up and do my bit. So I always found that enormous fun. Just absolutely brilliant. I really, really enjoyed that. And that kind of made my whole holiday and, whatever we were doing. And I guess, getting that sort of applause and everything was sort of feedback that, I must have been relatively good at it. I think I've always been able to kind of hear pitch, and I've always had a relatively decent sense of pitch. So I don't think I ever kind of went out of tune or, hit any really bum notes as a singer. I've always been able to follow it, and I think that it's literally just a case of having done so much of it, having done just so much practice, but none of it ever felt like practice, because I never did it in any formal sense. I did it for fun. I literally did it for my own enjoyment and fun, and just as a normal part of my life as I was growing up. So it never felt like something I had to put a lot of work and a lot of effort into. I could hold a tune, I could get up, I could perform, and it seemed to go quite well. And I never had any negative feedback about it, and therefore it just formed a positive feedback loop and made me want to do it more. So it was all very encouraging. And I remember one holiday that we were on, and I think I spoke about this quite a long time ago. It's in one of the videos where I do a cover version of a Poison song called Every Rose Has Its Thorn, because that was just one of my favourite songs of the 90s. I loved that. And we were on holiday, I think in Portugal, and I think I must have been 14 or 15, something like that, somewhere around my mid-teens. And there was a guy with a guitar doing some entertainment in our hotel where we were staying. And he was good, he was okay. But there wasn't a karaoke. And I just remember thinking, well, this is going to be my only opportunity. And, don't ask, don't get kind of thing. So I went up to the guy. He had a little break. He was doing a couple of hours, and during the break, I went up to him and I asked him if I could, after he'd finished his set, I said, would it be okay if I borrow your guitar and if I do a song? Would that be all right? And he just sort of looked at me for a minute. I think he wasn't sure, but then he was just like, yeah, okay, why not? Yeah, all right, fine. And then, yeah, so he did. He let me. And after his set, I got up and got his guitar and I sang Every Rose Has Its Thorn. And it kind of went down better than his whole set. He was good. He was fine. He was a perfectly decent performer, and it had been, and he'd played some good songs. But I think just because, I was young, and I think people usually want to encourage young people and kids, don't they? So I'd obviously got more applause and cheers you know, everyone had just been sort of like politely clapping after his songs, and then everyone went kind of crazy after mine. And then he sort of turned to me after that and he said, how long are you here for? Because I'm playing in Albufeira, like the next town, like in 2 days' time. Do you want to come with me? And I was well up for it, but my parents were like, I don't think so. So, you know, that could have been the start of my touring career. I could have been living my best life out in Portugal with this strange guy. But it was not to be. It was not to be. And that's totally fair. I totally understand, and I would have had the same reaction. But yes, that was just kind of the sort of thing that I used to do when I was young, because I was just so motivated to do it. And then kind of after that, in my later teens, I started trying to join bands with other kids at my school and college. So I joined a couple of different bands, sometimes just playing guitar. One time I tried to play bass. It didn't go well. The bass guitar was bigger than me, and that didn't really go well. But I did it for one gig. But that wasn't great. But yeah, so I just started finding my own way into sort of opportunities to carry on learning, carry on playing, and also to sort of carry on singing. But I still hadn't had any actual like vocal tuition. I just sort of carried on doing my thing. And obviously, as I got more into sort of my own taste in music throughout the 90s and onwards, some of my biggest influences really were those huge famous rock bands that I always talk about, like Def Leppard, Bon Jovi. So my singing, you know, these were some of my earliest influences in terms of vocal style. And I always had to sort of try really hard to sing some of these songs, because as I've since found out, and only found out in the last couple of years, you know, my vocal range, I'm a contralto, which is quite a low vocal range for a girl, for a female singer. And these guys, I think, you know, Joe Elliott and John Bon Jovi, and most popular rock singers, especially male rock singers, tend to be tenors. So there was kind of that difficulty for me in terms of, you know, they could reach higher notes most of the time than I could. And I also didn't know about any kind of vocal technique. So I didn't know the difference between sort of like chest voice, head voice, or falsetto, mix, where the break is, or how to do any kind of vocal compression, and all those different techniques that those guys use. I was literally just using my ear, listening to, you know, the tune, the notes, the melodies, trying to follow that as best I could, and trying to emulate their kind of sound as best I could. And so I sort of subconsciously, or without really knowing what I was doing, trained my voice to be able to go a bit, you know, to push a bit beyond what my kind of natural range would be, and to be able to switch between some of those, you know, the different kind of vocal techniques, to be able to get like the volume and projection that those guys are able to get kind of up into head, what they call head voice. Now, I realise not everyone will know what I'm talking about here. And so this is where the whole vocal tuition, vocal coaching, lessons around technique will really give you a lot of insight into how this all works. And I realised that actually, if I'd carried on, like for the whole rest of my life, doing what I was doing kind of as a teenager and into my 20s, I would very likely end up with damaged vocal cords. Doing that kind of thing without knowing what you're doing can really actually damage those vocal cords, and you can end up with like nodules on the vocal cords. And this, you've probably heard, has happened to quite a lot of singers, quite a lot of famous singers. Maybe most famously right now, the most famous one is Jon Bon Jovi. He practically can't sing anymore. And that is through years of belting out songs as he used to do, without using the proper technique, without knowing what he was doing, I think mostly when he was younger. So those problems would have started developing already like in his 20s, and he really, really, really pushed it and carried on. And I think it was quite some time before he actually realised the damage that he was doing to himself. And by then I think it was kind of too late. Whereas I think actually around the mid-90s, I think when Vivian Campbell joined Def Leppard, because Vivian had been getting professional vocal tuition, he kind of brought that expert vocal coach with him into the band. And I think that sort of might have potentially saved Joe Elliott and the others, because they all sing in Def Leppard. But I think just knowing a little bit about technique, a little bit about supporting your singing, using your breathing, that is so important, so that your voice isn't coming just from your throat, basically. So you're not just kind of relying on that in order to project, in order to get, volume, in order to get tone. You need breath control. And again, if you don't know how to do that, then you are just going to be relying on other parts of your anatomy and pushing those to places where they're not supposed to go. So when did I start finding out about all this stuff? Not until about kind of 15 years ago, I suppose. It was when I was over in Brussels. So I lived in Brussels for a couple of years between 2012, 2014. And while I was over there, one of the things that kind of happened in my workplace was that there were a lot of activities and clubs that you could join, because it was an international workplace, and the social thing was part of helping people to settle in and helping people to get to know each other and work together, because we were in this massive international community. So there was kind of like a lunchtime singing club, and it was run by a fantastic vocal coach. She was just amazing. And it was the first time that I ever had any experience of anything like that. And she did like an assessment of everybody's vocal range, because she was putting together kind of like a rock choir, if you like. So we were doing music that was current and that was really cool. And she was just really enthusiastic, and it just made the whole thing so much fun. Had so much fun with it. And she, said, okay, do you know what your range is? And I said, I've absolutely got no idea. This is the kind of music that I like. These are the songs that I like to sing. And she kind of went through some of them with me and pointed out things where I could do it, but not in a good way. And she was just a little bit harsh, but it was totally fair, where she was like, oh, that isn't the greatest sound. That's not a sound that you want. And she was like, that must hurt. That must be painful. And I'd be like, yeah, a little bit. So one of the songs that I always used to sing at karaoke was Living on a Prayer by Bon Jovi. And of course, it's all right most of the way through. And then you have that key change, which is a third higher. And I would struggle with that. I could get there, but not easily. And that bit didn't sound as good as the rest of the song, for obvious reasons. Because I wasn't supporting it, so I wasn't actually breathing correctly through it. And I was kind of pushing my chest voice to kind of get up to those notes. So I was like really, really pulling and really kind of shoving my voice box upwards to try and reach and hit that note, which really isn't a good idea. And it doesn't sound good. It's not physically good for you. It's not really the way to do it. So, you either kind of use head voice, which is much lighter, but if you still want the power, then you need to kind of achieve a sort of mix voice. And there's a whole load of theory and technique behind that. And you can look at how to do that in some of the videos and channels that I will recommend and put links to in the description. But I didn't know any of that, and this was the first time that I started learning it. And she sort of pointed out that I had this sort of natural vocal range, which was a contralto. And she said, there are a lot of what actually turned out to be my favourite female vocalists who had the same range. People like Stevie Nicks, who I absolutely love. And I would never say that I sound anything like, because nobody does. Nobody. Like, Stevie is unique. But in terms of range, she's a contralto. Same as me. Amazing. And one of my favourite female vocalists is Pink, whose voice, again, I probably try to emulate because I just love it so much. I do try as much as I can, I think, to sound a little bit like her. And she has the same vocal range, but she can probably get up there into like at least alto, not soprano maybe, but most pop singers, female pop singers, are sopranos. Okay, so she isn't the classic female pop singer. I think she's more of a rock singer, and that's why I like her. And she does have that slightly lower range, slightly deeper timbre to her voice. It's not light, poppy, that classic kind of pop star voice. There's so much more to it. There's grit in there at times. It's just really beautiful. I love it. And so, yeah, ever since she came out in, I guess, the early mid 2000s, that's been, a big influence on my singing. And that's somebody that I've wanted to sound like for a long time, and that I probably always will try to emulate. And yeah, so the vocal coach that I went to in Brussels taught me more about how to use that range and how to sing like that. But she also sort of identified that I had this real, like, bluesy rock voice. And so, you know, that really demystified a lot of things to me, because I said, yeah, I never feel like I get on very well with singing along to like pop music, especially if it's a female vocalist. I always do a lot better, or I feel a lot more comfortable really singing along to male vocalists in the rock genre, more or less. And she said, yeah, you have got that quality in your voice that definitely lends itself more to that kind of style. And then she just worked with me to build on that, really. But she said, you know, you do also, though, in a certain part of your range, have a little bit of similarity to someone like Adele and also Eva Cassidy, which I thought, I mean, I don't think I'm that good. I certainly never thought I was that good. I still don't. But this vocal coach was absolutely convinced that I could sing like Eva Cassidy, which, you know, I think she was being a bit overly optimistic, and maybe she was just being nice. She was lovely. And yeah, I think maybe she was just trying to encourage me. But I did try a few Eva Cassidy covers, Songbird, which was a cover of a Fleetwood Mac song, obviously, which I loved anyway. So I was very happy to kind of work on something like that. And I also worked on a couple of covers of Adele songs just to try that out and see, you know, see if I could kind of work towards increasing my range a little bit. And I do think that actually works for me in a way. So you will find at least one cover of an Adele song in my cover versions playlist, because that was one that I worked on with that vocal coach. And I also worked on a cover of Turning Tables. I have a couple of guitar acoustic versions of Adele songs in my repertoire, as it were, just because that was stuff I worked on with Marlene in Brussels. And it's not necessarily that I'm a huge fan of Adele's music or anything. I'm not really, but those couple of things were just worth doing in order for me to explore a bit more of what I could do with my voice and just develop it a bit with her help and support. So once I'd had that, I felt like I had a lot more of the tools, and I had a lot more of the kind of knowledge about how it was supposed to work and things that I was supposed to be doing, things like vocal exercises, doing warm-ups as well before starting to sing. That is a game changer. If I could give you just one tip or one piece of advice, it would be to warm up. Warm your voice up. Do some vocal exercises before you start singing, because it's a really physical thing. And it's not just about kind of warming up the vocal cords. It's your whole face. This is, you know, your whole head, and everything inside here is your resonant chamber. This is where you produce the sound. And everything from the placement of the vowels, particularly the vowel sounds that you make, to, you know, the pronunciation or enunciation of consonants or not, will affect the way that things sound as they come out of your mouth, obviously. So just warming all of this up and doing exercises that seem really silly, and probably look and sound really silly, but they're really worth doing. Just kind of sitting there and going to kind of relax all of those muscles, but get them starting to kind of move and work, and just making lots of funny noises, and using kind of breath as well, and being aware of consciously where you want sound to come out of. So you can have things just coming kind of from, as I've said, like your chest. So she would just kind of play a note and then you would kind of replicate it in, you know, whatever part of your range that sat with, like and that's coming straight from your chest. Or, you know, if you were doing a higher note, you really kind of want to try and compress so that it comes sort of from here, because you can use head voice, but it's very light. So that note, like an octave up, would be like ah, but that's very, there's not a lot of volume and projection to that. So you want to compress it so it's more nasal, and then you can make it project out more, like there are all these different techniques that once you know, you have that toolkit and you can start consciously using it to create the sort of sound and sort of vocal identity that you want to create. So yeah, that was massively informative for me, and I really got into it. And then obviously now we have the resources of YouTube at our fingertips, and there are some fantastic vocal coaches on there that you can just watch their videos and learn a lot from, or that you can get in contact with. And there is actually video on my channel where I do a whole lesson, a whole singing lesson with a singing teacher called Lexi. I'll put a link to her channel in the description. But yeah, that's on one of my playlists. I can't remember which playlist it's on, but she went through, again, like a whole vocal assessment with me, and we tried out some different things, and she tells me in that video about everything from how to stand and like position yourself, how to use the muscles of your diaphragm again, that breathing and that support to support the sound that you want to make. And yeah, she kind of goes through all the exercises as well that will help with all of that. And she's excellent. She's a proper music teacher, proper singing teacher. She's got an incredible voice herself. And I would strongly advise anyone who's interested in learning more, in developing their own vocal technique, to definitely get in touch with Lexi. She's also absolutely lovely, just a really great person. We're pretty good friends. We're still in touch. Do get in touch with her, or have a look at some channels on here, like one of my favourites, which is Chris Leap. I think that's how you say his name, Liepe. He's just at Chris Leap or Leaper. Not, like I say, sure how you say his actual surname, but he is a great vocal coach. I watch a lot of his videos. They tend to focus on rock singing, and obviously that's something that I'm pretty interested in. And obviously he's a male singer. He focuses a lot on the male voice, but I still think it's applicable for anyone, really. He does a lot on different, getting different textures in your voice, how to sing with distortion, how to use grit and distortion to recreate or emulate some of the great rock singers. So that's something that I'm particularly interested in, but I also think he's just a great YouTuber. I just really like his channel and I find his stuff really interesting, so I would definitely recommend having a look at his channel. I also really like a channel called Singeo, which is Singeo. Singeo Official is their YouTube channel, and they do a lot on things like vocal exercises, warm-up exercises, just really straightforward tips and advice. And they also teach stuff like how to sing harmonies. And that's something that has always fascinated me. I love vocal harmonies. So obviously one of my favourite bands of all time, Def Leppard, it's all about the vocal harmonies in that band. I just love that sound. Obviously, even going back to the Beatles, Beach Boys, the Eagles, every really big successful band, more or less, mostly, puts quite a lot of emphasis on being able to sing harmonies. And how to sing along and harmonise has been something that I've been trying to do for so many years. And that's not a thing that really comes naturally to me. So I've had to try to learn about how to do that. And this channel is excellent on those kind of techniques. But even just in guitar, like obviously one of the biggest and most famous guitar YouTubers, has got a little bit of stuff about singing actually on his channel. So, you know, these are just kind of tips for beginners and people starting off. He's got one video from about 3 years ago called How Not to Suck at Singing, which I think is a pretty good place to start. If you've never, you know, really tried and you want to start getting into it and you play guitar, go and have a look at Justin's tips so that you won't suck at it. There are, of course, many channels. And I don't usually do this because I don't like to really be negative, especially about any other YouTuber. But I would say the one channel to avoid, unless you're watching it ironically for comedy value, is Ken Tamplin. Do not in any way watch Ken Tamplin's videos for actual information or vocal tuition. The guy is an absolute crank. You know, he's a grifter and he really doesn't really know what he's talking about. And he himself is not a good singer. I don't think he's an especially good advert for his own product. Anyway, you'd see that yourself if you went and watched his channel. But yeah, only ever watch that for comedy value. Sometimes not even all that funny. It's just a bit sad. So anyway, that is the only caveat I would say. But just type in, vocal tuition, vocal coach, rock singing, or something like that. YouTube will give you a whole bunch of suggestions. And let me know in the comments if you find anyone who you think is particularly good. Please do put it in the comments below. Or if you already follow a channel and that's been really useful to you and been helping you, please do leave a comment and let everyone know so that we can all go and check it out. Anyway, yeah, also, leave a comment sharing your own story. Have you ever done any singing? Have you ever had any tuition? What sort of tips and ideas do you think would be helpful for other people who are maybe just starting out? What do you wish that you'd known when you first started out? I think this would be a great place to start kind of sharing some of those tips and ideas. And if you are already quite advanced and you've made a lot of progress, how did you get there? How did you move on from being a beginner to intermediate or intermediate to advanced level singer? Let's all pool our ideas and knowledge and experience, and we can all help each other to get there. But I really believe that this is something anyone can do if they want to. So thanks very much for your lovely comments and compliments on my singing and everything. Like I say, always gratefully received. And if you want to see more bits and pieces where I'm doing that on the channel, as I've said, there is a whole playlist of cover versions. Have a look at some of the early videos on my channel, some of the very earliest videos on my channel. And that's, basically where this whole thing started out. So do go and have a look at those. Give them a couple more views. They haven't got that many views. I hope you've enjoyed this video and found it at least a little bit useful. Please do give it a like and subscribe if you're not already. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so that you get notified when my next video comes out. But in general, they're always 8 p.m. on a Wednesday UK time, and there's always a live chat because I put them out as a premiere so that we can watch together and have a nice chat. All right, thanks everyone. See you next time.